She hadn't been looking for anything in particular that afternoon, no answers, no change, not even a distraction. It was just one of those in-between days, soft-edged and quiet, where nothing demanded urgency, and the city moved around her with its usual distracted hum. The kind of day that asks nothing of you and offers even less, except a pocket of time you can slip into and disappear for a while. The cafe she stepped into wasn't new, wasn't special, wasn't somewhere she'd even thought to remember, it simply existed along her path, warm enough to escape the sudden drizzle outside and quiet enough to think without actually having to. She chose the corner by the window, the table with the slightly wobbly chair and the faint draft from the glass, placed her coat over the backrest, ordered a coffee she wasn't really craving, and pulled out a book she had no intention of reading. She liked being alone there, liked the way the room blurred into background, the way people passed without expectation, how nothing asked her to explain why she was sitting by herself. She was just a figure in a place. Unseen. Undisturbed. Until he walked in. At first, she didn't notice him, not because he wasn't noticeable, but because she had stopped noticing in general. That was her safety, the half-focused gaze, the distance she kept by never looking too long at anything or anyone. But he slowed as he passed her table. Not abruptly. Not rudely. Just enough that the air shifted, just enough that she felt his presence before she registered him fully. When she finally looked up, he was already facing her, not with the curiosity of a stranger, not with flirtation, but with something much quieter and far more intimate. Recognition. And in that split second before he spoke, she had the strange, impossible sense that he wasn't seeing her for the first time. That, somehow, he had been looking for her, not today, not here, but for a very long time. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low, careful, shaped by hesitation rather than confidence, "but, is your name Elena?" The sound of her name, spoken so gently by someone she did not know, landed with an unfamiliar weight. She felt it more than heard it, like the distant echo of a song you once knew by heart but can't quite place. "Yes," she replied, slowly, without commitment, without certainty, unsure whether this was coincidence or something else entirely. "I knew your brother," he said. "A long time ago. We went to university together. I visited your house once, you were a teenager. I don't expect you to remember." And just like that, something shifted. A summer afternoon. A hallway. A book she had been reading near a window. A tall boy with quiet eyes who had said almost nothing but had watched the room with the kind of attention that stays with you long after you've stopped looking back. "I think I do," she said, softly. "You were quiet. You sat in the doorway while they played cards." He smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone amused. It was the kind of expression that holds both surprise and relief, the confirmation that a small memory had not lived only in one person's mind. "I remember you reading," he said. "You didn't look up once." She blinked, unsure how to respond, because no one ever remembered that about her. Not even people she'd known for years. Not even people she'd loved. He didn't ask to sit. Didn't push the moment forward. He simply stayed standing for a moment longer, his presence respectful but undeniable, as though he wasn't trying to enter her life, only acknowledged that, in some quiet, unknown way, he had already been carrying a piece of it for longer than she could imagine. And somehow, that was the most disarming part of all, not what he said, but what he didn't. Because he wasn't trying to meet her. He was returning to something she never knew she had given him. She hadn't intended to let him sit down, not out of rudeness, not from fear, but because there was something about this meeting that felt like it should remain suspended, held in the air like dust caught in afternoon light, visible, delicate, but untouched. And yet, when he slowly lowered himself into the chair across from her, with no need to be invited and no expectation that he should stay, it didn't feel like intrusion. It felt like continuity. She didn't ask him questions. She didn't say his name, partly because she couldn't remember it, partly because naming him might make the moment too real, too grounded in something it hadn't earned. Instead, they sat. In silence at first, though not an uncomfortable one, it was the silence of two people slowly adjusting to the weight of something unspoken that had just been brought into daylight after years of living quietly in the dark. He looked older now, but not worn. The years had softened some parts of him, refined others. His voice, when he finally spoke again, carried no urgency, no attempt to recover time or explain what had been missed. He simply said, "I've thought of that afternoon more times than I probably should admit." She didn't smile, but her posture shifted, a subtle realignment, like someone turning slightly toward the sound of a familiar song in the distance, not because they intend to sing along, but because they recognize it without effort. "You were 13, he added. "And I was just some friend of your brother's who stayed too late and noticed too much." She finally looked at him directly then, not with disbelief, not with discomfort, but with the calm, steady gaze of someone who has long since grown into the person she once was, and is no longer afraid of how little others may have understood her back then. "And you remember all that," she said, not as a question, but as a statement she was still trying to fully believe. He nodded slowly. "Some people pass through our lives like shadows. Others stay, even when they're not supposed to." She didn't respond right away. Her coffee had gone cold. The sky outside had turned a shade darker, as if the day itself had subtly shifted its rhythm to match theirs. She could feel the tremble of something inside her, not nervousness, but recognition. Not of him, but of a version of herself she had almost forgotten. The girl who had sat reading by the window because that was where the light fell best, because it made her feel less invisible, because it was easier to live in books than in spaces where she was never fully seen. He had seen her then. Not in the way of boys noticing girls. Not in the way of someone wanting something. But in the way of someone who simply notices, really notices, and never quite lets go of what he finds. "I never thought I'd see you again," he said, quieter now, more to himself than to her. "But I always wondered what kind of person you became." She exhaled, not heavily, not dramatically, just enough to soften something inside her chest that had remained tense since he first said her name. "I don't know if I'd become anything," she said. "But I stopped trying to disappear." Their eyes met again then, not as strangers, not as old acquaintances, but as two people who had once briefly shared the same moment from opposite ends of it, and now, unexpectedly, found themselves standing in its echo. He didn't ask for her number. She didn't offer to meet again. There were no promises made, no new beginnings spoken aloud. But when she rose to leave, she placed her hand lightly on the table between them, and for a moment, just a moment, he covered it with his own. No words passed. Only the confirmation that some memories, once carried long enough and carefully enough, will eventually find their way back, not to be repeated, not to be rewritten, but simply to be witnessed. And sometimes, that's all they ever needed.